Okay, we're going to get started in about another minute. So I'm going to ask Paul if he can bring our panelists to the stage. I'm here.
Jackie, everyone should be promoted, and it looks like they're all here.
Wonderful. Okay.
Hey there, Jackie.
Hey, Becca.
I'm trying to use my camera here. Hold on.
Okay.
Let's see. See if that works. I do none. General.
Okay, well,
I usually just use my picture.
Okay, I'm going to mute you, and I'm going to ask Paul to assist behind the scenes here.
Okay, sounds.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started while Dr. Wersel works out the camera issues. So as we've been discussing actually over the last 2 days now, we've been discussing the recovery of whistleblowers and how important the use of their narrative is. That when they talk to reporters, the media, but the same holds true for when they talk to Congress and other local elected officials. Just so the panelists know, we have had people join us today from all over the world. I think I've seen South Africa, Australia, Canada, the UK. So we have really drawn quite an audience to this event. So working with elected officials is broader than just with the US Congress. And I just wanted to recognize that. So, but this is where the whistleblower really needs to be their own subject matter expert in their field and can highlight the cause and impacts of the wrongdoing on a member's constituency or for a committee of jurisdiction. Congress can take action when the law is lacking the proper mandate. Members can be asked for information to be released or for internal investigations or direct organizations like the Government Accountability Office or the Congressional Budget Office to conduct an investigation and write a report. Whistleblowers need to be clear in their desired outcome and realistic about the role of Congress can play in their issues. Each step in the process when working with an elected official is important to plan and organize. So we're hoping that this panel will help employees understand the nature of that engagement and what can be done. So Becca, I'm going to start with you because you work for the House Whistleblower Ombuds Office. So if you can give us an overview of what you do and what services does the office provide to whistleblowers and to congressional staff?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much, Jackie, and the Institute generally for having us here. We're really excited to be a part of this event. So hi, everybody. I'm Becca Jones. I'm the Deputy Director of the House Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds. Our office was established in the 116th Congress as an independent and nonpartisan House support office. So what that means is that we advise House offices and committees on best practices for working with whistleblowers from the public and the private sectors. So we're not a whistleblower intake office within the House, but that said, we do have a menu of resources on our website, which is whistleblower.house.gov, which can provide sort of some indirect support. Really, our mission is to institutionalize safe, effective, and consistent practices throughout the House for working with whistleblowers from the public and private sectors. So we do that through a few main categories of services. The first I'll talk about is really our trainings. Our role is primarily educational in the House, educational and advisory. So we offer regular live, currently remote, given COVID, trainings for House staff on best practices for working with whistleblowers. We have a large training manual that accompanies that training, and we keep it very up to date with any new changes in law or retaliation tactics, that kind of thing. We also offer that training privately to House offices and committees, so we can sort of tailor the guidance and the laws that we talk about to the jurisdiction of whomever we're training. Now, second, we offer confidential consultations to House offices to help them in responding to whistleblowers who may have contacted them. So we can help staffers, for example, identify relevant laws that a whistleblower may be covered under. We can help staff, learn about best practices. We can pass along resources that they can share with their constituents or their sources that may help them, sort of depending on where they are. And we maintain communication with the staff as follow-up is helpful. We also help offices with guidance, developing their own kind of intake processes, their own case management systems. So it's very important, as I know we'll talk about here, that offices kind of know how to handle whistleblower disclosures and even just identify them. So we can help offices to put processes in place within their own office to make sure that they're handling these cases responsibly. And so that everyone kind of knows the general protocol that an individual office follows when it comes to working with whistleblowers. And then finally, we offer technical expertise on whistleblower legislation. So if an office is working on a bill that will affect the rights of whistleblowers in some way or create new rights, and they would like our technical expertise on the language, we're able to provide that confidentially. So that's kind of a general overview of our services and what we do in the House.
Okay, great. And so I'm going to skip over to Jason, and then hopefully Viv will be online. So Jason, as a former Chief Investigative Counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, can you explain and enlighten us on what evidence employees gave you that made you think, oh, this is compelling?
Well, I always like it when people give me documents, right? And I don't have to rely on credibility issues, to know whether or not it's something worth pursuing. But that's a pretty risky proposition depending on where you work. People need to think very carefully before they do that, and think about who they're sharing it with and what level of trust that they have with that member or that staff, and whether or not that trust is going to be, reciprocated. It's an interesting point for you to bring out right out of the gate, but yeah, because typically, the dynamic, as I'm sure you're very aware, is that typically a whistleblower comes forward and the response of the agency or the entity they're blowing the whistle on is to point at the whistleblower instead of the thing they're blowing the whistle on, right? And to start attacking that person's credibility in various ways. There's all the negative stereotype. Oh, they're just a disgruntled employee. They did something wrong that they're trying to get, some kind of cover for. These are the typical responses to the narrative. And so, yeah, absolutely. Providing documents and can really enhance credibility, even if you're doing it on a confidential basis, even if you do it in a way that you make an agreement before you provide them to the committee staff that, I'm providing this to you so that you understand I am a person with inside information who knows what I'm talking about and I can substantiate it, but you can't use this in your letter, because if you do, then they're going to know that you got it from me, right? And so if you're in that anonymous stage, which is where a lot of people start, where they want to provide some help to people who do oversight, to oversight authorities, but they don't want to stick their neck out and be necessarily publicly identified or identify, they want to try to do it anonymously. Providing documents can be a sort of interim step to, getting the staff interested in your story, understanding that you have, that it doesn't, it's not just your word against somebody else's word, and you're only getting one side of the story. And well, how can you judge that, right? A document is a concrete thing.
Right.
You know, if you can authenticate it, if it seems reasonable that it's authenticated, then that gets you a long way down the road to, from the whistleblower point of view, you know, building trust with the staff that, hey, you know, this is something worth you pursuing, and if it's compelling. But as I'm sure you also know, that's not always the case, right? There's not always a smoking gun document or even something close, you know, but anything that corroborates, you know, anything that corroborates your story obviously helps get you over that hurdle. And a lot of people contact committee staff claiming to be whistleblowers or calling themselves whistleblowers. Typically, it's the ones who don't call themselves whistleblowers, in my experience, right, that are actually, or may not know yet that they are a whistleblower. You know, who tend to have tend to be more fertile ground for spending the limited time and resources of a congressional staffer. And that's sort of one other thing I would point out to people is, you know, you need to realize your audience when you're going up to the Hill. These are people who have you know, a million things that they need to be focused on. A lot of members do not provide the kinds of time and resources and number of staff to the oversight function. You know, typically the person you're trying to contact may have legislative duties. They're tracking legislation on the floor. They're getting a speech ready for their boss tomorrow that they know everybody, you know, there's going to be a lot of attention to and a lot of scrutiny to. And it's just really hard unless you have dedicated investigative staff or dedicated oversight staff. And so you need to take that into account when you're preparing what you're going to provide and what your approach is going to be to folks on the Hill. You need to, you know, have that one pager, just like they're going to need to have a one pager for their boss, right? And really think about how to crystallize and be as pithy as possible in what it is you want to get across to them. And, you know, that's one of the things that I want to be able to help people do with my new organization. You know, having done it on the Hill for, you know, 22 years, being on the other side of the table, you know, I want to try to help folks who, you know, put their best foot forward when they're going up to the Hill, and help them strategize, and, you know, find the right place to go and find the right way to approach that Hill staffer.
No, I think that's really important. Actually, as you're talking, it reminded me of a story I'll tell quickly. So I was House Committee on Veterans Affairs staff, and we were very interested in, I think, what people called the Rantan study, but there was the National Vietnam Veteran Readjustment longitudinal study. And we had been corresponding with the VA, and the VA said, well, the previous study wasn't valid and we're not doing anything with it. And so as I was going through the paperwork from the study that started in the 70s, and this was the early 2000s, I was trying to figure out what makes the study not a valid study. And so I found the primary investigator. I called him on the phone and I said, look, you know, we're trying to figure out, you know, there's potential legislation to mandate that we replicate this study. And he was in South Carolina, and he said, I'll be there tomorrow. And he showed up with a dolly of boxes of documentation. And he's like, if the VA does not believe this study was properly done, here's everything you need to know. And I thought, okay, that was more than I thought I was going to get. But it ended up being, you know, the background for what I needed. But I agree that one pager when you're first approaching Congress is important. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Empower and what you're offering to people who want to go to Congress, and if going to Congress is a protected disclosure or not. And Becca, Jason, if you guys could weigh in on that.
Yeah. So you know, we're Empower Oversight is a new organization we launched July 2nd. You know, I want to be able to provide, as I said, you know, advice to people, not just who want to go to the Hill, you know, but obviously since that's my background and my expertise, you know, is Capitol Hill, working with inspectors general, you know, is something I had a lot of experience doing, you know, from the oversight side. And that's that's really the most effective 1-2 punch that I've seen when it comes to disclosures that, you know, especially where it's something that's in a gray area, you know, where you might not have a clear, you know, if your disclosures don't necessarily involve a clear violation of law, rule, or regulation, you know, and implicate some ambiguity in the law. There's, you know, the waste, fraud, or abuse that you're pointing out, you know, it might not be illegal. Somebody might not have violated a law, but, you know, well, that's the perfect time to go to the place that writes the laws to say, hey, here's a problem that is falling through the cracks of the current, you know, legislative framework. You should look into this so that you can understand what's going on here, so that you can, you know, so that your bosses can potentially legislate. That's the entire point of why Congress has the oversight power, right? It's to inform legislation. And so it's really in those cases where there's that, you know, where there's an ambiguity that someone is exploiting, right? Where you can be sort of the most effective. And it's often it's a great 1-2 punch to have an IG inquiry that a committee can oversee, right? And the committee staff can use, because there's the IG is going to be able to have access to information, you know, internal to the agency that's going to be very difficult for the folks on the Hill to get. But they're a nice sort of middle ground. If you've gone to the IG and you've got a compelling case, and you can then take that case to Congress and say, you know, and then the Congress can help hold the IG accountable for doing something about it. And in my experience over the years, I found that sort of combination, you know, is really effective at making change. And I don't think that change is necessarily, I don't necessarily define positive change as a legislative change, because a lot of the time, you know, my former boss, Senator Grassley, you know, he put a really high emphasis on, you know, making a difference and getting the outcomes that you're wanting within the existing legal framework. And, you know, sometimes the answer isn't necessarily to pass another law. Sometimes there's adequate legal authority right now to do the right thing, but the agency just simply isn't doing the right thing. And sunlight and exposure is what is needed most. And of course, Congress can be really effective, and IGs can be really effective at imposing that transparency. But, you know, one of the things Senator Grassley always said was, you know, if I have to pass a bill, then I've got to get a majority of 535 people in 2 houses to agree, and to put it on the agenda, and to vote for it, and the president has to sign it. Like, that's a lot of stuff for one member to do, to take the lead on and to accomplish. And it can take years and years and years, even on basic sort of common sense things that you would think everyone would agree on.
Right.
But no, you can affect change as just one member through oversight, through exposing misconduct or exposing a problem. And you know, typically I found that the legislative solutions often end up being really narrow. You do learn, and it's vital to learn, but sort of the exposure, you know, and accountability aspect of it is just as effective in affecting change.
So I think you raised a really good point that most people think they're going to go to Congress and they're going to get to be a witness at a hearing because their case is compelling. But that's the rare. That's the rare that happens. Besides having an oversight hearing, a legislative hearing, and a markup, how then can and Becca, I know you guys are advising on this. So how can a member of Congress or congressional staff help a whistleblower? And then I think we do have Viv somewhere here. I'm going to introduce her in a moment. And then I see we already are getting a bunch of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and I just really want to put an exclamation point on everything that Jason said, because, you know, I think members are often graded by kind of how many bills did they pass at the end of the Congress, but what you don't see is how much effective oversight and how many, meetings that their staff had with agency, leadership on really rooting out long-term problems that cost taxpayers so much money over so many decades. And a lot of that is fueled by whistleblowers. And I hear you, Jackie, on, I think a lot of folks go to Congress and they expect this is a huge deal. What I'm raising is, a massive problem. How is no one paying attention to this? And that's very real frustration. And I 100% am sympathetic to that and can't imagine how frustrating that must be, going to a member and saying, this is happening in your district. How are you not holding a hearing on this? But like Jason said, there's so many priorities and so many things that are going on behind the scenes that we don't see, that aren't, reported on the news every night. But there are a lot of ways that a member or a committee can take what a whistleblower has given them and conduct a whole investigation over it that, the public doesn't know about, and that may leave the whistleblower feeling, somewhat dissatisfied, because these investigations can take a long time. So that's one of the reasons we advise staff, keep the whistleblower up to date where you can. And we advise whistleblowers, be a resource to staff. Make yourself an asset, because you, as the subject matter expert on what you're bringing forward, can help demystify agency jargon. You can call the bluff on false answers. So if staff go to a meeting and they're fed, kind of questionable responses or things that aren't entirely true, the whistleblower can help to read through that and say, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true, and these are the documents that you should request that are going to prove that. So there's just a tremendous capacity for partnership in the follow-up work that whistleblowers and staff should be aware of, to really make sure that the relationship is mutually beneficial, for as long as it lasts.
So I think one of the questions, and I think a point I was trying to get at earlier, is what makes a whistleblower protected when they go to Congress? If they bring you information, are they considered a whistleblower? And how do you somehow, specifically by bringing something to Congress, do you confirm, or how do they become whistleblowers with some level of protection if they've gone to Congress?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm happy to sort of take a first stab at that. And I will just quickly plug, we have a growing database of what we call fact sheets on our website, which are kind of sector-specific deep dives into certain whistleblowing laws. So just starting with the Whistleblower Protection Act here, which is the primary executive branch whistleblower law that I know a lot of us are familiar with. We have kind of a 4-page fact sheet that breaks down, what does your disclosure have to look like? Who can it go to? Where do you go to enforce your rights? That sort of thing. But generally, conceptual, we like to tell staff and remind staff that conceptual whistleblowing, exposing something that's a matter of public concern, isn't always the same as lawful or protected whistleblowing under a federal statute. So just, taking the Whistleblower Protection Act, for example, but I think this applies to really most modern federal whistleblowing laws, someone has to come forward with a reasonable belief that they're exposing one of several categories of misconduct. So like Jason was saying earlier, a violation of a law, rule, or regulation, gross mismanagement, a gross waste of funds, an abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. Those are kind of the Whistleblower Protection Act categories. And again, it applies to a lot of other kind of sectors of whistleblowers, because that standard has been applied regularly. Now, there are some kind of misconceptions about that. Like, does the whistleblower's motive come into play? Or if they're a secondhand whistleblower, does that matter? And Congress has said, no, it doesn't. They've amended that law to say, generally motive is not a factor here. So we like to give an example in our trainings where if a medical professional were to come forward and say, hey, my employer's not giving me PPE during a pandemic, and I don't feel safe, and they're telling me to work anyway. And we say, that's whistleblowing because they're speaking out about a danger to public health and safety. It's a concern that could affect thousands and thousands of people. Now that person may be coming forward because they're afraid of their family. They're afraid for their family. They're afraid for their own health. But that doesn't mean it's not whistleblowing. And they may also be covered under a statute if they face retaliation for speaking out. So the long and short of it is that, yes, generally Congress is a protected audience for whistleblowing disclosures under most federal statutes.
So, and then just really quick, I see we've had another question from the audience that Becker, Jason, I bet you can answer this. So what about campaign contributions? How does that influence how a member might or might not take action? So if I'm a whistleblower and I've complained about XYZ company and them being bad actors, not providing PPE, let's continue with your example, but that same company is a big campaign donor to the local representative. How does that come into play, and how do whistleblowers, how should you deal with that, knowing that you might be bumping up against a different kind of conflict of interest?
Well, obviously it shouldn't come into play at all. And the reality is, people sort of in the popular culture, we sort of talk about this in a way that I don't think is reflective of the reality on the ground for most staff in most offices. I mean, staff who work on Capitol Hill are not campaign staff, right? They don't know.
Those are different people, correct?
Those are different people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I mean, when you're a committee staffer like I was for 20 years, I mean, I'm a government employee. I worked for the committee. My boss was Chuck Grassley because he was the chairman of the committee, right? But
your boss could change. That could be somebody else. Grassley is kind of unusual that he has stayed where he has been for so long.
Yes.
But I worked for the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and we rotated people,
right?
Depending on elections.
Right, exactly. But staff tend to follow members. I moved from the Finance Committee to the Judiciary Committee when Chuck Grassley, had a leadership position that moved from one to the other. But generally speaking, I mean, I don't, we have lots of other things to do. We're not checking to see who's giving contributions to, right? Now, obviously, there are some members, I would think it's something you should be aware of, right? I mean, if you happen to know that there's a close, because it's all publicly disclosed, it's fairly easy to figure out who is a major support, and there are sometimes when you see relationships, where it's very clear that this member, gets a lot of support from this particular industry or this particular, it's usually more industry specific, right, than a particular donor where that relationship is clear. But yeah, you should absolutely be aware of that, and understand that, if it's clear in public and you're aware of it, then the staff may be aware of it too. But it's not like the staff knows typically. I mean, they would have to go look it up just like you would most of the time.
Yeah, I have to say also, as former Hill staff, I had no idea about what was going on with the campaign and in the districts.
Yeah, we were taxpayer. I mean, we're taxpayer employees. We're funded by the government. We don't, we're not working for the campaign.
Right.
So
yes. So I understand that Viv is able to hear us, even though we can't see her. Although I do have a slide that she shared. I can maybe put her picture up at least. But Viv, I mean, so you have done a lot of these advocacy and action campaigns, including some stuff with Whistleblowers of America. We've gone up to the Hill together. Can you outline what you've done to be successful in meeting with congressional staff and getting to testify before Congress?
Sure, Jackie. When I first, there you go. When I first started, I have to tell you, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. And I didn't know the difference between the House, the Senate, the committees, but I just knew there was something wrong. Just someone had mentioned earlier, when there was something wrong and you need to have it fixed, you think in your own mind, why isn't anyone jumping in on this? Why isn't anyone helping me? Why isn't anyone making this, a public issue? And so what I did was I wrote a syndicated writer who wrote articles for Military Update, and I made it personal. And what made it effective was I told my story short because it was in an email, and I sent a picture of the last family photo. It happened to be a 2-tiered death benefit for active duty deaths. My husband had come back from Iraq and they would not pay me war benefits. So by sending a picture, by sending a short email, by reaching out to someone, since I didn't feel I had the backing of the major VSOs, I decided I would go public. How do I go public? I didn't know this person, but he was a syndicated writer. Sent it, and lo and behold, he had contacted me the next day and said, look, my wife and I read your email, but when we saw your picture, that was worth 1,000 words. And he said, that's what really got to us. So one of my keys to success starting advocacy, even though I didn't know anything about it, was finding the person who was going to champion for me, was going to campaign for me, that would get the word out for me, in which it was Tom Philpott, who's a syndicated writer. So that article went around the world. I made the early bird special for the Pentagon because there was some inequities on how death benefits were. So I learned a lot by not knowing a thing, actually. When it comes to laws and bills, I've had people ask me, what is it that you wish you had known before you started your advocacy on changing the death benefit for active duty deaths? And that was, I wish I had seen how a bill became a law by Schoolhouse Rock, because that says it all. And I'm like, dang, if I had known that, I would have gone to committees, but I didn't. I just went door to door. I got lucky. Most bills take about 10 years to pass. I started mine July 2005 with an article. Case was heard on the Senate floor, had an amendment to the NDA. I walked the halls for about 3 months and going back and forth from North Carolina. And lo and behold, my amendment went into the NDAA, which was 6 months, which is rare. So when that gave me a taste of success, once you get a taste of success, you really do, like, you don't stop. You do not stop. And it's like, what's next? What am I going to go to next? One thing I would recommend strongly is schmooze, schmooze, schmooze. Tell your story when you go on the Hill, when you go to a reception, have your cards, tell your story to the lady at the grocery store. Practice like it's a foreign language. Practice telling your story, because the more you practice your delivery, the better your elevator speech will be, the shorter it is. I have given my elevator speech on the Hill so well because I've done it so many times. And I was able to whip out a card and say, let's talk later, and have that delivery. Can your staffer call me? Can I call your staffer? Get that connection. Schmooze, schmooze. Connect, connect, connect. I can talk. I do 1-hour presentations on advocacy and actions. So I'm going to do something that I tell my participants who take my course to do, and that's to pause. And that's what I'm going to do. So if anyone has, if you want to have me go down another direction, I will. So I'm going to pause right now, Jackie.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing your picture so I can also see some of the questions as they're coming in. And so I think we've had earlier, I think this is from earlier, we were talking about the inspector generals, and how do you know when you go to the inspector generals that they are helping you? And I think this has come up in other panels. So what makes them your advocate as opposed to, you know, complicit, part of the government, part of the cover-up. How do you work with the IGs to really get the investigations that are going to make a difference for Congress?
Well, the IGs are not necessarily your advocate. You shouldn't view them as your advocate. By the way, you shouldn't necessarily view the folks you go to on the Hill as your advocate either. Even though, you know, I mean, I worked for a senator who, you know, is by reputation and you know, by his work, very much, you know, considered a whistleblower advocate, and certainly does advocate for stronger whistleblower protections. But, you know, when you're in the position of receiving a disclosure from a whistleblower, we always had to be really clear with them that, you know, we don't represent you. I was an attorney. I represented the committee, and our interest might not be exactly the same. So, you know, while we might have a desire to look, you know, we want to take your information and use it for our, you know, for our government purposes to inform our bosses and to develop the information. But, you know, we had to remind people, you need your own counsel. You need someone who's in your corner looking out just for you. You know, in terms of going to an inspector general, the reason that it can be effective, as I said before, is that, you know, they report to Congress and to the executive branch, and there are statutory protections for their independence. And, you know, you're much more likely to get, you know, a sympathetic ear from an inspector general than, you know, from necessarily someone in the agency who, you know, may or may not know whether or not they have any, you know, they're not involved in the wrongdoing or not. But, you know, like anything else, members vary in their ability to handle these things well, and inspectors general vary in their ability to handle these things well. And I've seen it, you know, I would give a word of caution to anybody, you know, which is why you need good advice, you know, from people who are just looking out for you. I've seen it way too many times where someone will go and, you know, sometimes there's a race to the IG, right? And the manager and the person who's reporting the wrongdoing, you know, which one's going to get to the IG first and start the narrative. Sometimes even if the employee gets there first, the defense of the agency to the IG when they start getting questions is, well, hey, this person, yeah, they're just telling you that because they did this other thing, right? And then it sort of gets all tangled up in this, you know, story that starts to become about the person who blew the whistle instead of about the underlying question. So I've seen that happen with IGs as well. I mean, they're far from perfect, and some are better than others.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you can do, if you think that you have gone to an IG and that IG, you know, is sort of being a stalking horse for the management of the agency, or they're, you know, whether through incompetence or maybe there's not as much independence there in that relationship as there ought to be, and you have concerns about that, that's the kind of concern that should go to the committee of jurisdiction who has oversight of that IG. And that's where you can have the force multiplier effect. And you can, you know, the more that the IG office knows that they're going to have to answer questions up on the Hill about how they handled this case, the more pressure you are able to put on them to handle the case properly.
Yes. Jason, you and I are working on something right now that Senator Grassley has put a letter out. It's been in the media, so I feel comfortable discussing it. But on insider trading at the VA, it's taken a group of VA employees to bring us that issue and help package it. And Senator Grassley has put it up out in the media, getting the VA to actually do anything about it, respond to it. That's been a little bit of a different story, but you know, an attorney's involved, the SEC is involved, and getting to a point where we get resolution. I mean, we're seeing where the VA hasn't even responded to a senator.
Well, that's a good point, a good example, because, you know, some of these underlying issues were what the IG was well aware of them a long time ago, and they've reopened an inquiry now. Senator Grassley got them to confirm that they've reopened an inquiry that they had previously sort of declined to do anything about. And why did they do it? Because of public pressure from the Hill, right? Yeah, no, that's a perfect example of how it can work, how it can work properly. I actually, you know, our organization did a FOIA related to that at the beginning of August, and I just actually just got about 579 pages of documents I've been going through on that. I haven't told you that yet, Jackie, but
we're going to need to have a conversation.
I think a related point, I mean, on both, what we're discussing here, going to IGs, and kind of the last question on, well, what if, the campaign finance question, like which office should I be going down to the Hill? Or gosh, I should have gone to a committee a long time ago. I think that really speaks to the importance of doing your homework early and often, and really how critical it is to, if you can, work with knowledgeable counsel to strategize on where you're going to go, or a whistleblower support organization. And Empower is a great example of that. It's so critical that you have the right audience. And like we said earlier, some offices are going to be inclined to prioritize something over something else. We have a guidance document on our website all about best practices for working with Congress. That may be a helpful starting place. And I did want to flag a resource that's newer to about half of the inspectors general, the establishment IGs, that are the whistleblower protection coordinators. And these are folks who are there to essentially help communicate what the IG's policies are. A lot of them provide confidential consultations to better understand your rights as a whistleblower. They're in charge of making sure, the employees within the agency are trained and that the training requirements are being met. Because, a lot of employees have to go to the IG. If you're a federal contractor or a military service member, you have to go to the IG to start the enforcement of your rights. So some folks don't have the ability to go to like the Office of Special Counsel or another forum, so they have to go through the IG. So the Whistleblower Protection Coordinator can be a good starting place if you just have questions about your rights, or where to go or how to start the process. So I did want to flag that resource and the guide on our website as well.
Hi, Jackie, this is Vivianne. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Jackie?
I was actually just going to ask you
Yeah.
about developing that strategy, because you and I have done that. Develop the strategy, figure out the plan, where to go, who to see. So can you expand on that?
Are you talking to me, Jackie? I just want to make sure I got the floor.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
yes.
The people, everyone should know where the authority lies. Is it the DD-13? It's Department of Defense, DOD 3314.10. That is for anyone who's active duty. That's a DOD directive. But if you're not active duty and you're a civilian federal employee or CIA or one of the alphabet agencies, you would be going on and follow under the Hatch Act. I know I did some research. I did a presentation for the Army, and during the research, I realized that the VA, what does the VA, who do they follow? And from what I can see and who I asked, who work for the VA, they pretty much follow the Hatch Act, but you do have to follow their set of directives. So the directives, if you are, say, for instance, under the Hatch Act, you may be at a different level of the Hatch Act, like an SES, again, the certain agencies, to find out where you follow, what you can and cannot do, and who you contact to make that complaint.
So but let's go back to talking about the strategy, because I think that's important information for, if you're a DOD whistleblower. But what about it sort of in general? I think Becca was making a really good point about, know your strategy, know if you should go to your member, should you go to a committee? How do you plan all that out?
So you got to find out who the actual, who has the authority, who holds the, say, for instance, if I am putting in a complaint about the noise abatement of my city, I'm not going to talk to my member of Congress. That is a municipality. That's a municipal issue. So I find, where does that issue lie? If the issue is DOD, then it's going to be federal. Then you can peel back the onion even more so. If it's, say, for instance, where the issue is, find out what committee that would be jurisdiction for that issue. Is it a VA issue? If it's a VA issue, it's not a DOD issue. Then you would go ahead and reach out to look at the committee for the House VA committee and the Senate VA committee. Look at your member of Congress, your own member of Congress, see what committee he sits on. If you're dealing with a health issue, then you want to see who's on the health committee. Maybe your member of Congress or someone from your state is on it. So you do want to narrow in and find out who has jurisdiction, where does this issue lie that could make a difference for change. Jackie, am I going in the right direction? I feel like I'm testifying.
No, I think this is really good. And I should mention, we've been in the process of revamping the Whistleblowers of America website. But one of the things Dr. Wersel and I worked on is a guide for working with Congress that we'll be posting on our website, and that we'll share as a resource post this summit, because we do want to start providing our own tools and resources that are tailored to the whistleblowing community on how to handle some of these things. Jason, are you raising your hand?
I am. I just wanted to, I wanted to go back, and one of the questions that I saw that was asked earlier, I just wanted to go back and pick up on it because it's such a common one, and I'm not sure that we hit it directly on point. So, you know, there was a question about if an investigator or auditor asks for a particular piece of information from someone and then they provide it to them, are they officially considered a whistleblower after that? This is a really common issue that came up all the time. And, you know, one of the big issues I worked on when I was with Senator Grassley was Fast and Furious. And it came up a lot of time in that, right? Because there was the question of, for some reason, people seem to think, particularly folks in law enforcement who are considering cooperating with Capitol Hill, they tend to think that if they, some people believe that if they're the ones who reach out, that makes them a whistleblower, and that has a bad connotation, especially in law enforcement, right? But, oh, if I'm asked a question, then I have a duty to answer the question, and then therefore, you know, that's okay, right, in the law enforcement culture. And people get that sort of all mixed up and tangled up with whether or not it's a protected disclosure. There is nothing, it doesn't matter one way or the other who contacts whom first, you know. So like we had people we often had intermediaries, you know, contacting us, hey, you know, you should contact this person and ask them this question, you know, because they don't want to reach out, because they don't want to get branded as the whistleblower, right? And so there's often this little dance at the beginning of something, like I said, especially in the law enforcement context. But as far as whether it's protected or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you were asked. It doesn't matter whether you volunteered it. If you make a disclosure that's covered and protected to a protected audience, then it's a protected disclosure, right? And that means that, you know, there's this other thing about, you know, people focus on, well, is this person a whistleblower or is this person not a whistleblower, which is kind of the wrong question, right? The question is that it doesn't have a meaning under the framework of most of the laws and statutes, right? It's, did they make a protected disclosure, and was there retaliation for that protected disclosure, right? Those are the key questions that people should sort of be more focused on. It's not like you have a hat that you put on, now I'm a whistleblower and I've been designated. A lot of people say, well, I've been designated a whistleblower. Well, you're not. There's no process to be designated a whistleblower, right? You either made a protected disclosure and you didn't, and you're not going to get the answer to that question usually in a legal context until sort of the end of your, you know, whether you win or lose your case if you make a retaliation claim.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note, I saw Shana Devine, who also works in the she's House Whistleblower Ombudsman Office. She's been putting some resources in the chat.
Great.
So, and we'll make sure that if anybody still needs those resources, that we'll make them available as well. But I see she's posted that in the chat. I see there's a lot going on in the chat. So I wanted to call that out specifically, that information was there, and that, we'll make our information available as well, because this is sort of a tough nut to crack, because the Congress is big. It's a lot of moving parts, and understanding your way in is important. I did want to make note, though, that we've had, like, when I worked for the House Veterans Affairs Committee, like, we would say, oh, we want this witness, and they would say, oh, we don't think that's the best witness. We'll give you this witness, and it'd be like, oh, you could see where the agency was trying to circumvent. So we would actually have to subpoena the witness that we wanted. And I've had whistleblowers tell me I asked to be subpoenaed because I didn't want to get fired for anything I said. I was testifying under oath. I was subpoenaed. That gives you some protection. The other thing that occurred to me is, I know everybody will say, oh, I gave stuff to Congress and I told them I would testify for a hearing. Well, that's great, but are they having a hearing? So one of the things I've suggested is that if you have your issue, like, Becca mentioned PPE, it mentioned veterans benefits. If you know what your issue is, it pays to start tracking that committee and to see when they're having hearings, because now you know they're interested in the issue, or when. They might not be interested in May, but look, they're going to have a hearing in June. So it gives you time to get prepared, and then you can always submit a statement for the record. There are some rules to that. You should find out from the committee, double space, double space, Times New Roman, 12-point font. I mean, it really is some specific rules, but there are also rules about, they can't put something in a congressional record or publish your statement for the record if you say, oh, Jason Foster's a terrible guy and he's really corrupt, unless Jason Foster is in jail or it's otherwise in the public news. You can't say those things in a statement for the record and think, oh, well, I'm just reporting my, write a statement about your really bad boss, and then Congress is going to go, oh, yes, of course, he was a really bad boss. And your opinion is not fact. So you can't put those things into a congressional record. So you might not get to testify, but that still doesn't mean that the right congressional staff won't put eyes on your statement if you write it correctly, or if you send them, Vivianne mentioned earlier about writing letters. That's really important, is an actual letter to a congressional office. I mean, I remember when we were on the Hill, the rule was every letter got answered, even if you didn't understand the question. Everything that came to us, every phone call, every letter had to be answered. It was the rule for our committee. So I think being able to follow those rules are important, to know what they are. Let me see, I think we have one more question. We've had a lot of questions coming in from the audience and in the chat that I've also been trying to, and then mostly, so I see some questions about citizen whistleblowers, but that's not we're mostly talking about employees who are whistleblowers. You're certainly, as a citizen, we used to have a sign, or one person had a sign over her door that said, "This is the people's house." So anybody, anytime, anywhere, any place can contact their member of Congress and have results. I mean, Ted Lickliddle, who was on the panel yesterday, talked about, he went to his local congressman and his local senator, and he got their buy-in, and those members became his advocates. And I think, I know, Viv, you've done that as well. You've gone to your local senator. I think at the time he was on the committee of jurisdiction, so that worked out. But going to those local folks and seeing what their buy-in is, and going to their, if you live in the district, go to the district office and check in and see what that looks like.
This is Vivianne. One thing I try to instill on, I'm on the legislative committee for American Academy of Audiologists. And one thing I try to instill upon them is that the power that audiologists have as individual, as a stakeholder, sometimes has a lot more power than a lobbyist. So go ahead and reach out to your local elected official, because you are the subject matter expert in that field. You are the stakeholder. You're the constituent, which holds a lot of weight. So remember that.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful point, is you don't necessarily have to go to Congress alone. Viv and I have done lots of door knocking together because we could, left seat, right seat the issue and talk about from an emotional perspective, from a technical perspective, know who else cares about this issue, because there are other stakeholders like audiologists as a group are going to have a lot of information, and can be powerful to have like a statement on their letterhead saying, yes, we support this issue, please have a hearing, or please open up an investigation, or can you contact the agency, because we as an organization, now not just a singular whistleblower, and I think that goes into being a citizen whistleblower. You can bring a community together, and I'm always mindful that if you can't find community, then maybe you need to think about your approach and how you're presenting and how you're packaging this, because I think that's really important. Viv said she tells the lady at the grocery store her narrative. Yeah, practice. I think that was a really great point. Make it your elevator speech, because nobody's going to listen to you if you're in it just for an hour, go on and on and on. I think you have to be mindful that when you're meeting with congressional staff, you're lucky if you get a 15-minute meeting. You're really blessed if you get a half hour. And if they sit with you for an hour and the member of Congress actually walks in and sits down to say hello, then those are your cues that you're making an impact on your issue. If that's not happening, then you need to think about, well, how am I presenting my issue? Am I making this salient enough? And I think Viv has done a really good job of, this is what happened. She even made this little video with the peanuts. This is this is my issue. Here's what happens if I have this benefit. Here's what happens if I have this benefit. This comes to this comes to that goes to this goes to that. And she made it very easy to understand what was wrong with the benefits that were being provided. In this case, this is a DoD benefit, that was a VA benefit. How do they come together? So I think those are really key things, is to pull that together. Becca, any other advice, resources? I know we put them in the chat, but maybe you could just sort of give a quick overview on how do we have impact?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, just to piggyback for 1 second on what you were just saying, Jackie, I think you made a really great point earlier, which is, even if you don't get somebody's ear once, try again, because priorities do change and workloads do change, and the details of your case may change. So if you contact a staffer and they don't have the bandwidth to work on it now, but then 3 months down the road, things are heating up and some more information's come to light, reach back out to them and let them know, because they may be at a point there where that level of information is something that they want to move forward with. So I just did want to make that point. But I mean, yes, our website has a lot of great resources. We have, while we're not an intake office, we do want to provide support sort of indirectly. So we have our whistleblower audience landing page. where we've got governmental resources, non-governmental resources, like we've got Whistleblowers of America's Peer Support Training Manual, which is a fabulous resource. And we also have things that we've developed, like our legal fact sheets, which I mentioned, our survival tips document, and our best practices for working with Congress. If I was going to just offer one piece of parting advice, it would really, just be to engage in whistleblowing on your own time and with your own resources, as opposed to doing things at work or with work resources. Just to protect yourself, seek out end-to-end encryption, that kind of thing. Think about how you're engaging, and certainly don't reach out from a work device.
Yeah, that's important. All right, well, I think we're at about time. I do want to thank you all for joining us. Viv, I'm so sorry we couldn't get your video. I'm glad I at least had some pictures of you to show everybody. I think that the what it takes to actually go to Congress is not as simple maybe as most people think, and I appreciate Becca, Jason, and Vivianne Wersel for joining us today to really explain and dive deep in with us onto what that can really be like. And please do take advantage of the resources. I know they're House resources, but I assume that some of the same rules of engagement apply for the Senate. And I'm hoping someday there will be a Senate whistleblower office. And there are also whistleblower caucuses. I don't know if that's public information. If you wanted to reach out to members of Congress who are like members of a whistleblower caucus. We had like Jackie Spear yesterday. Her work on whistleblowing is also pretty well known. Senator Grassley.
Senator Wyden and Senator Grassley are the co-chairs of the Whistleblower Caucus in the Senate.
And I also, just as a, nobody here mentioned political party. So I think that these are bipartisan and bicameral issues. Is important to note, like, don't be afraid to reach out from one side of the aisle to the other. You need, for bills to pass, you need co-sponsors, and a bill is more likely to get traction if it's got bipartisan co-sponsorship, but Democrats and Republicans and independents.
That's absolutely true, Jackie. And I think it has been a really fabulously bipartisan issue for many, many decades. We do also have a legislation tracker on our website, if that's of interest to folks, interested in watching, legislation introduced in either chamber this Congress. We have whistleblower legislation tracked. So check it out if it's of use to you.
No, that's a really good tool as well. So thank you. So it is lunchtime. I never want to be standing between somebody and a sandwich or salad. So I appreciate this session. We will go to lunch. We come back in an hour, and we're going to be talking about Jedis and the uniformed services with police officers and military who have faced harassment and discrimination issues. So we're going to tighten our focus later today for that. And hopefully everybody will be able to come back and join us. We will leave the Zoom session open so that if anybody wants to turn on a camera, we will leave this for just networking. It's hard to make a virtual event interactive. So we're trying to take advantage of some opportunities and let you interact with each other and use the chat and hopefully be able to connect if you want to go get your sandwich and come back. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. I'm very honored.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much,
Appreciate
everybody.
the invitation.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good lunch.
Bye-bye.